Hello and welcome again to Dancing in the Shadows. I'm your host, Jason Ring. So last podcast, we talked a little bit about what it takes to heal. What is the one thing that we need to do? And essentially I said that it's about taking your subconscious mind, your inner self, your inner being, your inner personality, and merging it with your conscious mind. Essentially allowing your inner self to open up for all to know, and not just those selected few, and to exercise those things that you carry on the inside, those dark moments of your life, and release them to other ears, to disperse that negative energy, to take that pressure out of your system, and let it disperse amongst the many and become a memory. Let it die. And that's what this podcast is about. It's about me in my current state of depression, darkness, and my transition from it to light. That's my direction, because I've made that commitment to myself. And this next story is going to be very difficult for me to tell. I think where we left my life story, I talked about my grandparents and how wonderful they were, a little bit of my grandfather who was in the war, my grandmother from a small town in Ohio called Youngstown. I haven't really gotten much into her story. I know only a little bit. She has an interesting past as well. And from what I know, I talked about my mom and dad, and the struggles they had financially early on when I was young, and how my dad used to work with my grandparents in the 70s. They owned a Waterbed Store in a small town, and the adventures of my dad delivering and putting together these waterbeds that were bought. It was fun time for me as a kid. And also how my parents were deeply in love at this time, and they still had passion. My dad would come home with a couple of squirt guns, and they'd have a squirt gun fight in the house. I mean, these are my parents. I mean, they're acting like kids and still being joyful, and they still had youth. I think by the time I was 6 years old, my mom gave birth to me pretty young. Things were a little different back then. I think my mom was 17 when she got married, and she was 18 and a half when she gave birth to me. So she was still quite young when I was young. I just remember how awesome it was when my parents were happy, still very much in love. It was cool. Well, I talked a little bit about the religious organization that I grew up in. And honestly, unfortunately, it is suppressive to finances in most families. Most families live at or below the poverty line in the Jehovah's Witness religion, in part because they demand so much of your time and your effort and your energy. The other thing is they don't encourage higher education. They never have. It serves no purpose because the end of this system of things is coming. You see, they believe in the Armageddon principle. And that is that Satan, the devil, will be testing the earth, mankind. And he's been doing that now during this generation, right? And that at some point, Jehovah, when it gets too bad, Jehovah will step in. The world will go through destruction. Fire and brimstone. The earth will open up and swallow the wicked ones. And essentially this Armageddon is a war between Satan and God, and the destruction of the earth, and those that are wicked will befall everyone. These are things that I was indoctrinated with at a very young age. Imagery, iconography. It's the sheer terror in some of the images that I was exposed to at a young age of the ground swelling up and people with just terror in their faces falling into the abyss. These are things that steered my belief system at a young age, that indoctrinated me into this cult. I was told that this was coming, that this would happen, and that it could be any day now. So you must stay steadfast with Jehovah and follow his principles to a T, or you may suffer the consequences of what's coming. Okay, imagine being fed this information at your earliest memories. 6 years old, 5 years old, 4 years old. It was traumatizing and scary, where you have these people in your life that also believe this teaching, this ideology. They firmly believe it. The people that you most trust firmly believe this to be real. They still do. And does that mean that I don't believe that there is an Armageddon coming, or that there is some sort of ultimate conflict that's going to take place? I mean, no. I think that in a large way on this continent, it's happening right now with this struggle between good and evil. It's inside of every one of us. And collectively, it's in groups too. I think we're always being tested. Other continents have seen Armageddon already. I mean, just look at Syria. Just Google Syria now and look at some of the images of what Syria looks like now. I mean, it's essentially what I was, conditioned with at an early age, the same imagery, destruction, buildings falling, earth opening up, fire and brimstone coming from the sky and destroying everything around you. I mean, sounds like a missile to me, sounds like a drone attack, people falling to their deaths, warring nations. These are the times we're living in right now. So do I believe in Armageddon? I mean, yeah, I kind of still do. So do I think that these teachings are all inaccurate? No, I mean, most of this stuff is based on original Bible principles, scripture. So a lot of these Christian religions, they interpret things differently, and they fall under different sects. That's SECT. And these different sects of these different Christian ideologies, they kind of have a different tailored approach to what they teach. So in some areas, they may be more accurate to the original scripture. This is the way I look at it. You have all these different New World translations, these different translations. This isn't the source of truth. The source of truth is the original documents, the original text, the original holy scriptures. And then people will come in and say, well, there's other cultures that predate Christianity that tell the same story. A deity born of a virgin was put to death and raised 3 days later. He was a carpenter. I mean, all the same. He was considered the light bearer, the Alpha, the Omega. Okay, I have personal theories on this. Okay, if this is true, and I haven't really researched it deep enough to know or validate this, it may be true. What I do know is that civilizations have risen and fallen many times throughout history. And maybe the spirit of good and evil is a shared consciousness between all the people on the planet. And certain events can steer this consciousness one way or the other, or they can clash where one side may believe this and the other side may believe that. That is light and dark, that is good and evil, that is yin, that is yang. So maybe throughout history, the manifestation of these light and dark modalities, maybe the actual manifestation happened at that cataclysmic moment where the light and the dark are clashing to the point of a societal collapse, a global collapse. Perhaps this is just speculation. This is just me thinking out loud in real time. Perhaps each of these events did exist in our history that predate Christianity. Maybe the current version of this story happens to be Jesus Christ. Maybe prior to that or, generations ago, it was Shiva, I don't know. What I do know is we are living in a time where good and evil are in the open, quite visible. If you can merge your subconscious mind with your unconscious mind, you will see it. It's there. Let's get into the story that changed my life. So at 6 years old, we'd already moved maybe 3 times. We lived in 3 different places in Carmichael. And at some point, we lived in Manteca and LA for a short time as well. My dad was just bouncing around to different jobs, trying to survive. This is in the early 80s. And I do need to make a correction. My grandparents' Waterbed Store was open from, I believe I was correct in thinking that maybe in the early 70s, like 71, 72, that they opened the Waterbed Store. It might have been a little bit later. But I do know now that they closed it before 1980, maybe 1979 or 1978, somewhere around there. And the reason why I know this is because I realized that the story I'm about to tell corrected that date. So it's amazing that I'm getting into these stories and I'm starting to realize timelines now based on different stories that I'm telling about my past. And so at the age of 6 years old, I lived in this beautiful white 2-story house, and we had roommates, boarders that lived within the house that helped us pay for the house. And we were renting this house, and it wasn't far from the house we lived in prior. And we're still very close to my grandparents too. Anyways, I'm 6 years old. I'm living in this house, and my dad happens to be working as a truck driver, and he had a steady job. And I remember one evening, he came home. He's like, Jason, I got a surprise for you. I'm like, what? He goes, I want to show you something, but you can't have anything. I'm just going to show you, but you're going to love it. Okay, I'm 6 years old. I'm curious. He takes me out to the driveway. We had a really long driveway. He was able to park his semi-truck in the driveway when he was home. And he turns on the light outside, shines a light on the back of the truck, and he pops the truck door latch open and rolls that door up. And from floor to ceiling, there were toys bound for Toys R Us. And I was just ecstatic. It was amazing. It was like a treasure hunter stumbling upon the largest cache of gold you can possibly imagine. But I couldn't touch it. I couldn't take anything. So it was like my first experience with light and dark clashing at the same time. It sucked so bad. I cried and I begged, and it didn't work. But it's a memory I'll never forget. So fast forward, my birthday, 7 years old. Of course, couldn't celebrate it, but 2 days after my 7th birthday, my uncle and my grandfather and my aunt would normally be coming over to mow our lawn. We were one of his new customers, and because he got into landscaping after we closed the Waterbed stores. My grandfather was sick, and my uncle and my aunt would mow the lawns and take care of them if he wasn't able to, because they knew the route. And my grandfather rarely got sick, but he was pretty sick during this time. And so my uncle and my aunt came over to mow the lawn. And I came outside and I was talking to my aunt, and she was getting the lawnmower or my uncle got the lawnmower off the back of the truck is what happened. And then my aunt drove it over to the lawn to mow it. It was a riding lawnmower. In fact, if you Google Forrest Gump mowing a lawn, that lawnmower he's on was the very same one. It's the Snapper Model 3080. I know this very well because what I'm about to tell you is going to shock you to your core. In the next podcast, please like and subscribe, bookmark this, tell a friend. And I just want to thank you all, for listening. It means a lot to me. Next episode, we get to the meat of it.